Hello, Mr. Ambassador. Nice to meet you, and I'm glad that you gave your time and attention to make this interview. A few hours ago, opposition leader Alex, who is General Secretary of the Free Democrats Party, political party, was shot 5 times in the center of Tbilisi. But do you think how this fact will impact pre-election period on the opposition leaders and the opposition parties? And we've seen lots of such kind of attacks in the past times, like attacks on the opposition leaders, on the opposition offices. And how do you think these facts will impact on the pre-election period?
When I learned of this terrible attack, of course I was shocked, and my first thought went to his health and well-being. I understand that his injuries are not life-threatening, for which, of course, we're all very grateful. I know Alex. I've only been here 6 months, but I've met with him several times. I had him to dinner here. He's a very thoughtful man, a big advocate for integration into Euro-Atlantic structures. And I hope that there is a complete investigation and that whoever is responsible for this is brought to justice. And I would just urge everyone to remain calm, and let's allow the investigation to play out. And of course, our thoughts and prayers go to Alex and his family.
As for the pre-election period, my next question is about election codes. Lots of international organizations recommended the government of Georgia to enact new election codes on the basis of consensus of every political players in the process. But the process is postponed for 4 years from now. So how do you think the facts impact on the legal results of the elections?
You know, the United States really only has one interest in this whole process, and that's that the elections of the fall are seen as completely legitimate. And in order for them to be seen as legitimate, of course, you need to have very transparent rules. You need to have a consensus on how the elections will be conducted, and of course there needs to be the kind of environment where politicians are able to express their views freely. Again, not to have a kind of an environment where there's a feeling of intimidation. And we, of course, are paying very close attention, talking to all different parties. And I think that everybody agrees that this election there needs to be a level playing field for this election. And so we're keeping a very close eye on what's happening in the legislature, what's happening with the Central Electoral Commission, what's happening with the media.
And how would you assess the media environment ahead of the 2016 elections? As we remember the disputed cases on ownership of Rustavi 2, the biggest television, and also we face a similar problems with Maestro. Lots of people think that government is involved, that government wants to gain a control over the media before the elections. Do you see any interfere in the media environment by the government of Georgia?
I think that we had some concerns last fall. We were very explicit about our concerns, both publicly and in our talks with the government, that the court case around Rustavi 2 had the potential to change the pre-electoral environment, in that there was a decision of a court to change the management of the leading opposition television station. So this to us was a possible game changer if the management was changed. It wasn't changed. But of course, we need to stay vigilant. The Georgian people need to stay vigilant. The political structures need to stay vigilant, and we need to ensure that everyone has access to the airwaves, not just the government, but also opposition voices as well.
What do you think, what is the reason of reduced frequency of raising issues on Georgian occupied territories of Abkhazia and South Ossetia in the international organizations and the international media? Do you think that this is a result of the inappropriate activities of government, or do you think that it's different priorities for USA and for Europe for this year as we see the problems in Ukraine and in Syria?
I think that the United States has been very consistent in supporting the territorial integrity of Georgia. We call constantly on Russia to abide by the ceasefire agreements of 2008. I don't think you should mistake a lessening of frequency of attention in the media with a necessarily a lessening of support. In other words, there's a lot of conflict in the world now. There's a lot of instability. In many ways, Georgia is an island in a sea of instability. And if Georgia is not getting the kind of media attention that it did in 2008, that's actually a good thing that it's not getting that kind of attention. One of the reasons I was sent here is to keep is to ensure that Georgians are aware that the United States continues to stand by Georgia and continues to support the territorial integrity of Georgia.
The so-called president of South Ossetia, Leonid Tibilov, made a public announcement that there will be a referendum in the South Ossetia to join the Russian Federation. How do you assess these facts, and do you think that South Ossetia will become next Crimea?
Any referendum that is conducted on the territory of Georgia that is done without the consultation of the Georgian government is automatically illegitimate. And so we would not give any sort of credence, any sort of attention, support to any referendum that was conducted in South Ossetia without the knowledge or without any consultation with the legitimate government of Georgia in Tbilisi. It's as simple as that. We'll reject it.
As for the occupied territories, the Hague International Criminal Court's prosecution office has started investigation on alleged war crimes during 2008 conflict between Georgia and Russia. Do you think the Hague International Criminal Court will assess the evidences on the occupied territories of Georgia and in Russia?
We are not a party to the treaty, the treaty that set up the International Criminal Court. But what I will say is that I think one of the big problems has been the lack of access of international organizations into the two separatist regions. And this is obviously especially problematic when international organizations want to provide humanitarian assistance, or when international organizations want to ascertain if there have been human rights violations in the region. So I would say, to the degree that this investigation is able to provide some transparency, be able to provide some objective information, then that would have to be a positive thing. But I think that the Georgian government is so far done the right thing in being very open with the ICC and having a good dialogue with the ICC. But clearly, we'll keep our eye very closely on this process.
According to the statement of NATO's General Secretary's Special Representative for Caucasus and Central Asia, James Apaturai, countries which deny to take political decisions to support Georgia becoming a NATO member state, they fear that if Georgia will get membership action plan, that would raise risks for Georgia without any security guarantees.
That is a concern, I think, of some NATO allies, that by extending Georgia a membership action plan, it could conceivably expose Georgia to aggression from Russia. I think Russia in the past has shown that it is willing to violate international law to prevent states like Ukraine and Georgia from acting on their aspirations to join the Euro-Atlantic community. I think there's also a very important principle here, though. I think the principle that we support, that the United States supports, is that every country has the right to choose its own path, to choose its own security orientation. And this is why we support Georgia's membership for NATO. No country has the right to interfere in the sovereign decisions of Georgia. And we reject the idea that another country has a veto on Georgia's decisions.
2016 is a presidential election in USA in November. What is your expectations, and what do you think that 45% of USA will change in the US foreign and internal policy, and how will these changes will impact on Georgia's foreign policy?
You have saved the hardest question for last. This is a very unusual political campaign in the United States, especially on the Republican side. I think that the good news is for Georgia is that foreign policy, when it comes to this part of the world, is bipartisan. I would hope and I would expect that there wouldn't be tremendous changes in U.S. policy towards the Caucasus, towards NATO, and towards Georgia's Euro-Atlantic aspirations. But I don't have a crystal ball, so I can't tell you exactly what the impact is going to be in November. Like I say, it's a really unusual political campaign this year, especially on the Republican side.